money, all pursue it relentlessly. Still, remarkably few grasp its genuine purpose. For the majority, it represents currency, liberty, ease, or achievement. Among the impoverished, it signifies existence itself. Within the middle tier, it embodies safety. Among the affluent, it displays social standing. However, to the strategist's intellect, capital represents nothing of this nature. Capital becomes influence rendered tangible, although this transformation occurs exclusively through calculated application. Niccolò Machiavelli, the architect of royal strategies and sovereign wisdom, held no admiration for riches based on their lavishness. He possessed zero interest in precious metals for their superficial sparkle. His examination of capital mirrored a military commander studying landscape formations, never for aesthetics, always for tactical superiority. He observed how resources, when deployed with strategic intelligence, could purchase faithfulness, neutralize adversaries, and shift the equilibrium of complete dominions without unsheathing a single blade. For a closer look into how power silently moves through wealth and positioning, subscribe to Dark Psychology Decoded to uncover what conventional teachings consistently overlook. This represents the craft that remains invisible to ordinary minds. Individuals labor endlessly, accumulate reserves, deploy investments, showcase their acquisitions, yet paradoxically remain enslaved to the very commodity they presume to possess. Their belief suggests capital itself delivers dominance. However, Machiavelli would ridicule such innocent thinking. Prosperity standing alone becomes brittle. It faces theft, taxation, devaluation through inflation, or seizure by forces superior to personal control. Authentic influence emerges not from merely possessing capital, but from transforming it into a mechanism that manipulates the conduct of surrounding individuals. Thus commences the strategist's methodology of converting financial resources into commanding authority. The privileged classes comprehend this contest perfectly. They refuse to pursue currency for momentary satisfaction. Instead, they construct frameworks that bend others into their gravitational field. For these architects of influence, prosperity never serves as a destination, but functions as an instrument. And instruments face judgment not by their ownership, but through their strategic deployment. Allow the exploration of fundamental principles to begin. First principle states, capital lacks inherent authority. It serves as armament. Common individuals maintain the delusion that accumulating greater financial resources automatically amplifies their dominance. They fantasize that hoarding wealth equals stockpiling influence. Yet Machiavelli would counsel that dormant resources constitute squandered potential. Dominance never originates from precious metals locked within vaults. It emerges from the potential of its tactical application. A fortune remaining inactive commands no respect whatsoever. It attracts thieves and generates envy. However, when capital becomes strategically mobilized, financing supporters, compensating faithfulness, disciplining disobedience, it transforms from passive to dynamic. It becomes ammunition within the campaign for control. Consider historical evidence. Monarchs who simply accumulated treasures faded into obscurity. Their gold became plunder for subsequent conquerors. Yet those who comprehended the strategic law of capital converted their holdings into networks of loyalty. They built permanent military forces and clandestine partnerships. Their prosperity transcended luxury and became leverage. Identical principles operate in contemporary society. A billionaire squandering fortunes demonstrating wealth through vehicles and vessels might captivate the impoverished, yet remains impotent against governmental institutions capable of freezing holdings with singular proclamations. Conversely, another billionaire who discreetly channels resources into political initiatives, advocacy organizations, or information networks possesses dominance vastly exceeding numerical balances. This individual commands the narrative framework, not merely the decorative elements. The strategist never conflates capital with authority. Resources become viewed as armament, valueless during storage, catastrophic during application. The instruction becomes transparent. Financial power measures only as formidable as the strategy it enables. Second principle declares visibility constitutes vulnerability. Concealment maintains dominance. Throughout the modern era, the affliction of exhibition has contaminated even the prosperous. Digital platforms reward ostentatious displays. Luxury timepieces, prestigious labels, exclusive aircraft. Individuals broadcast their accumulated value as though numerical figures proved dominance. Machiavelli would label this behavior reckless. The instant wealth becomes revealed, adversaries receive invitation to calculate vulnerabilities. Transparency never signifies strength. It represents exposure, and exposure summons predators toward the vulnerable. The privileged understand this phenomenon instinctively. The most formidable fortunes across the globe frequently remain invisible. Ancestral dynasties, fiduciary structures, international holdings, prosperity designed for obscurity. The strategic mind recognizes that protecting dominance requires concealing its magnitude. What drives this necessity? Mystery functions as defense. The less others comprehend regarding available resources, the less they can anticipate subsequent maneuvers. A concealed fortune permits striking without forewarning, negotiating without duress, and withdrawing without distress. An obvious fortune, alternatively, paints targets upon backs. Therefore, the strategist hides while remaining observable. Appearance suggests modesty, existing without ostentation, while behind curtains influence extends into corporate chambers and governmental corridors. Permission is granted for the foolish to underestimate, because underestimation becomes the most precious defense available. The principle remains elementary: never permit capital to speak louder than strategic calculations. If people comprehend holdings, they will scheme to acquire them. If they doubt holdings, they will pause, and hesitation becomes the companion of power. Third principle establishes dependency generates authority. Here exists the authentic transformation of converting capital into dominance. The wealth itself holds minimal importance compared to how many existences depend upon it. A salary manufactures compliance. A loan manufactures duty. A contract manufactures silence. The strategist utilizes prosperity not to liberate himself from others, but to shackle others to himself. Once survival depends on generosity, opposition becomes unfeasible. Machiavelli dreaded dependence for himself, yet treasured it as weaponry over others. He understood that whoever commands sustenance commands the predator. In today's reality, sustenance equals revenue. The elite comprehend this flawlessly. Corporations architect complete ecosystems where millions rely on their platforms for livelihood. Governments distribute benefits that bind citizens into cycles of submission. Billionaires finance ventures, awards, or charitable organizations that establish silent networks of appreciation and apprehension. Dependency transforms capital from a commodity into a gravitational phenomenon. People orbit the strategist not through affection, but because they cannot afford departure. Consider this question: how much prosperity builds dependency? Do others require you, or do you exclusively require them? If the latter applies, dominance is absent. You are merely a servant adorned with riches. However, if others cannot operate without presence, then fortune has transcended currency. It has evolved into command itself. This forms the foundation of strategic artistry. For masses, prosperity means accumulation. For the elite, prosperity means weaponization. Capital is armament, capital is mystery, capital is dependency. These constitute the foundational laws. Once mastered, perception shifts from viewing wealth as comfort or status to recognizing it as influence sculpted into tangible form. The ordinary individual believes capital transforms people. He imagines that when someone claims lottery winnings or receives inheritance, their character undergoes metamorphosis. But the strategic intellect knows better. Capital never transforms character. It magnifies what already existed. It exposes what was previously concealed in shadows. This explains why capital transcends being merely a commodity. It becomes the most efficient diagnostic instrument of human essence. Fourth principle declares capital serves as the sharpest examination of loyalty. Words cost nothing. Promises remain fragile. Vows dissolve under pressure. But capital forces individuals to choose. It positions temptation before them and demands their decision. Machiavelli understood that loyalty in poverty means nothing. A companion who stands beside you possessing nothing remains untested. The authentic examination arrives when prosperity enters the environment. When opportunity materializes, when a fortune becomes available, when betrayal could be compensated, then truth reveals itself. This explains why the strategist never accepts loyalty at surface value. He examines it through capital. He distributes small opportunities, controlled advantages, or calculated gifts, never for generosity but for observation. Does the recipient demonstrate humility or arrogance? Do they grow supportive or envious? Do they reciprocate with respect or entitlement? Capital reveals character faster than time ever could. An individual who worships prosperity will betray for it. An individual who resents fortune will quietly undermine you. and the rare individual who develops greater discipline facing capital is the one worth preserving. For the elite, prosperity never purchases loyalty. It measures loyalty. They distribute favors not as gifts, but as experiments. And when someone fails the examination, they are severed, not with anger, but with surgical precision. To convert capital into dominance, learn to utilize it as a filter. Never request people to prove their loyalty with words. Present them with the temptation of prosperity and observe their actions when they believe no one is watching. Their reaction will speak louder than any promise ever could. Fifth principle establishes control flows, not quantities. The naive individual counts his riches obsessively. He fixates over net value, banking institutions, and compensation. He imagines that the magnitude of the number determines the magnitude of his dominance. The strategist knows this is false. True authority never comes from how much capital you hold. It comes from how much capital you direct. Consider this reality. A billionaire may hoard billions in private accounts, but a minister who allocates a national budget of hundreds of billions wields greater power even if his personal wealth is small. Control of distribution always outweighs possession. This is the law of flows. When you control where capital moves, you control where people move. Employees, partners, clients, even governments all adjust their behavior to stay aligned with the flow of value. The one who writes the checks, finances the projects, or opens the gates of credit dictates the frame within which everyone else must act. Machiavelli would remind, kings did not simply own treasure. They decided who received it. This act alone determined who remained loyal, who became powerful, and who starved. Modern elites follow identical patterns. They invest in media to control attention, in politics to control policy, in infrastructure to control dependency. They rarely announce their wealth. Instead, they quietly direct streams of influence that others cannot escape. To practice this law, stop obsessing over accumulation and start building mechanisms of distribution. It concerns not being the richest in the room. It concerns being the one who controls the tap. Sixth principle advises letting them believe capital is the prize. This represents one of the darkest strategic secrets. People are most easily controlled when they believe capital itself is the ultimate reward. The powerful rarely compete for the same prize as the masses. While the many fight for salaries, bonuses, inheritances, or promotions, the elite position themselves to control the structure that hands out these rewards. Machiavelli observed this centuries ago. Princes would offer titles, land, or payments not because they valued them, but because they knew others did. The true prize was not the coin, but the obedience the coin purchased. The same holds today. Corporations dangle promotions like carrots. Politicians promise subsidies and relief. Influencers sell visions of financial freedom. All the while, the architects behind the scenes use these illusions to keep the masses running on treadmills, blind to the fact that the real game is elsewhere. The strategist never wastes time chasing small prizes. He positions himself as the gatekeeper of prizes others chase. This creates an asymmetric advantage where effort flows toward him while he remains stationary, deciding who receives rewards and who faces deprivation. The masses believe they are competing for wealth. The elite know they are competing for position. Position determines who writes the rules, and whoever writes the rules owns the game. This represents the ultimate transformation. From player to architect, from participant to designer, from servant of capital to master of the system itself. He permits surrounding individuals to exhaust themselves pursuing observable rewards while he examines the battlefield with calculated detachment. He comprehends that as long as currency remains worshipped as the ultimate objective, populations will self-regulate their behaviors, self-censor their ambitions, and even self-destruct through desperation just to obtain it. Within that frantic hunger, they transform into predictable entities easily manipulated. To transform capital into commanding influence, one must master this sleight-of-hand deception. Perpetually allow them to imagine the paycheck represents the ultimate prize. Permit them to hunger for the salary increase, the ancestral inheritance, the prestigious designation, and during their celebration of these hollow victories, advance silently to secure dominion over the distribution mechanism itself. The reasoning becomes transparent. When ownership of the source is established, the decorative trophies become utterly irrelevant. Most individuals pursue fortune as though it constituted liberation. They maintain the delusion that riches will emancipate them from apprehension. However, Machiavelli observed the contrary reality. Capital frequently intensifies fear rather than diminishing it. Once individuals taste luxurious comfort, they develop terror regarding its potential loss. And apprehension, never poverty, forges the most formidable shackles of all. Seventh principle establishes comfort as the most powerful restraint. An individual dwelling in destitution presents danger to established systems. He possesses minimal assets to forfeit and substantial opportunities to acquire. However, an individual habituated to lavishness, to elevated social standing, to constant applause, this individual becomes domesticated and compliant. He censors himself preemptively before external authorities intervene. He obeys quietly not through genuine respect for authority structures, but through terror of forfeiting the identity that prosperity has constructed for him. Machiavelli would articulate, bestow comfort upon an individual, and you have simultaneously bestowed a restraining leash. The contemporary privileged classes comprehend this phenomenon flawlessly. Corporate entities architect lifestyles for their executives that remain perpetually beyond sustainable maintenance without corporate affiliation. Political figures grant privileges capable of withdrawal through singular legislative votes. Complete populations become pacified through consumer luxuries that render rebellion conceptually unimaginable. The strategic instruction becomes evident. Prosperity lacks authentic dominance if it manufactures dependency on preserving an artificial image. If identity fuses inseparably with income streams, integrity will be sacrificed to safeguard appearances. One may project wealth externally, yet remain fundamentally enslaved internally. Consequently, the strategist cultivates a paradoxical discipline requiring mastery. He experiences prosperity yet refuses reliance upon it. He constructs frameworks permitting departure if circumstances necessitate withdrawal. He approaches comfort as an instrument, never as a commanding master. Recognizing that the precise moment comfort transforms into necessity, authentic freedom evaporates completely. Eighth principle declares wealth devoid of mystery constitutes vulnerability exposed. Contemporary society worships transparency doctrine, but Machiavelli perceived through this deceptive illusion. Revealing the complete magnitude of accumulated fortune simultaneously reveals the comprehensive extent of exploitable weaknesses. Once surrounding individuals comprehend precise holdings, they commence calculating what to appropriate, what to demand, and methodologies for manipulation. The affluent who ostentatiously flaunt their prosperity never command genuine respect. They become measured quantities subject to mathematical analysis. Their timepieces, their vehicles, their estates fail to inspire authentic apprehension. Instead, they inspire mathematical calculations among predators who assess defensive vulnerabilities, opportunists who compute potential generosity, and adversaries who strategize their eventual downfall systematically. He permits others to drain themselves completely while pursuing conspicuous accolades as he analyzes the strategic landscape with calculated precision. He recognizes that as long as currency remains elevated to divine status as the terminal aspiration, populations will automatically regulate their conduct, suppress their authentic expressions, and even orchestrate their own destruction merely to grasp it. Within that frenzied desperation, they render themselves entirely foreseeable and easily manipulated. To accomplish the metamorphosis of capital into commanding authority, mastering this sophisticated deception becomes essential. Perpetually permit them to believe the monetary compensation represents the genuine treasure worth pursuing. Allow them to desperately crave the salary elevation, the familial inheritance, the prestigious title designation. And during their euphoric celebrations of these superficial victories, advance silently and methodically to establish dominion over the entire distribution apparatus itself. The logic becomes crystal transparent. When sovereignty over the origin is secured, the decorative rewards become completely meaningless and irrelevant. Most individuals pursue fortune as though it embodied emancipation from constraints. They maintain the naive conviction that riches will liberate them from existential dread and anxiety. However, Machiavelli documented the inverse phenomenon occurring consistently. Capital frequently amplifies apprehension rather than diminishing it systematically. Because once individuals experience luxurious comfort personally, they develop paralyzing terror concerning its prospective forfeiture. An apprehension, never destitution, manufactures the most indestructible restraints imaginable. Seventh principle establishes comfort functioning as the most formidable restraint mechanism available. An individual residing in poverty presents genuine danger to established hierarchies. He possesses negligible possessions to surrender and substantial opportunities for acquisition through disruption. However, an individual thoroughly habituated to extravagance, to elevated social positioning, to perpetual commendation, This individual becomes completely domesticated and manageable. He censors himself preventively before external authorities need to intervene whatsoever. He obeys wordlessly not through authentic reverence for authority frameworks, but through consuming terror of surrendering the fabricated identity that prosperity has meticulously constructed around him. Machiavelli would express, bestow luxurious comfort upon an individual and simultaneously you have bestowed a controlling leash around his neck. The contemporary privileged elite comprehend this psychological mechanism with terrifying precision. Corporate institutions architect comprehensive lifestyles for their senior executives that remain perpetually beyond sustainable maintenance, without continuous corporate affiliation and approval. Political figures distribute privileges readily capable of immediate withdrawal through singular legislative declarations. Complete populations become systematically pacified through consumer luxuries and entertainment that render rebellion conceptually unimaginable and practically suicidal. The strategic instruction manifests evidently. Prosperity lacks authentic dominance if it manufactures psychological dependency on preserving artificial appearances and constructed images. If personal identity fuses inseparably with continuous income streams, individual integrity will be readily sacrificed to safeguard superficial appearances before observers. One may successfully project wealth externally toward observers, yet remain fundamentally enslaved internally to maintaining that projection. Consequently, the strategist cultivates a seemingly paradoxical discipline requiring extensive mastery and psychological fortitude. He experiences prosperity's benefits, yet adamantly refuses psychological reliance upon its continuation. He constructs resilient frameworks permitting immediate departure if circumstances necessitate strategic withdrawal without catastrophic consequences. He approaches comfort strictly as a versatile instrument, never as a commanding master dictating decisions. Recognizing that the precise moment comfort transforms into psychological necessity, authentic freedom evaporates completely and irreversibly. Eighth principle declares wealth devoid of enigmatic mystery constitutes vulnerability brazenly exposed to exploitation. Contemporary society enthusiastically worships transparency doctrine religiously, but Machiavelli perceived directly through this seductive yet deceptive illusion systematically. Revealing the comprehensive magnitude of accumulated fortune, simultaneously reveals the exhaustive catalog of exploitable weaknesses opponents can target. Once surrounding individuals comprehend precise holdings with numerical accuracy, they immediately commence calculating what to appropriate strategically, what to demand aggressively, and sophisticated methodologies for systematic manipulation. The affluent who ostentatiously flaunt their prosperity never command genuine respect from observers. They become measured quantities subjected to cold mathematical analysis by predators. Their luxury timepieces, their premium vehicles, their sprawling estates consistently fail to inspire authentic apprehension or fear. Instead, they inspire precise mathematical calculations among circling predators who methodically assess defensive vulnerabilities, opportunists who compute potential generosity exploitation, and dedicated adversaries who strategize their inevitable downfall with meticulous planning. However, the strategically minded elite adamantly refuse ostentatious public display whatsoever. They deliberately obscure actual holdings through sophisticated techniques. They systematically scatter assets across intricate structural frameworks designed for opacity. They consciously inhabit lifestyles conspicuously, beneath their authentic means publicly, while simultaneously expanding commercial empires privately through concealed networks invisible to casual observation. They strategically permit others to underestimate their capabilities systematically, because calculated invisibility functions as the supreme defensive shield available against threats. This phenomenon explains why the perpetually quiet affluent represent the most formidable adversaries imaginable in strategic conflicts. They pursue absolutely zero external validation whatsoever from observers. They harbor no fear regarding judgment from surrounding others. They remain perpetually underestimated by surrounding competitors and adversaries, and systematic underestimation functions precisely as effective camouflage in strategic warfare encounters. An individual who successfully avoids measurement cannot become effectively targeted by enemies. Ninth principle establishes detachment as the supreme advantage available. Here manifests the most paradoxical law among all principles. The masses frantically chase capital to experience security, to prove their worth to others, to fabricate an identity. The strategic mind categorically rejects this seductive illusion completely. He earns capital. He multiplies capital exponentially, but he never becomes psychologically fused with capital itself. Why this discipline? Because emotional attachment to prosperity creates dangerous predictability patterns. An individual paralyzed by terror of forfeiting capital can be threatened easily, manipulated systematically, controlled completely. His consuming fear of loss enslaves him far more effectively than destitution ever could possibly achieve. However, the individual who cultivates profound detachment, the psychological ability to abandon everything and rebuild, achieves authentic liberation impossible otherwise. In negotiation encounters, he cannot be pressured through threats. In political arenas, he cannot be purchased through bribes. In warfare situations, he cannot be blackmailed through leverage because he possesses the singular dominance everyone else fears desperately. The genuine willingness to forfeit everything and methodically rebuild from nothing. This represents not recklessness but extraordinary discipline cultivated through practice. The strategic mind recognizes his authentic wealth never resides in account balances, but within the architecture of his intellect, his strategic frameworks, his cultivated patience, his accumulated leverage networks. He could forfeit everything immediately today and systematically rebuild tomorrow because capital never functions as his master dictating decisions. It remains his obedient servant executing commands. The most formidable presence inhabiting any environment never becomes the individual possessing the most riches, but rather the individual who demonstrates zero need for them psychologically. This person cannot be bribed with offers, cannot be intimidated with threats, cannot be controlled through conventional mechanisms. He dictates the terms governing every exchange encounter because his survival never depends on anyone's approval or validation. Machiavelli would articulate clearly. Authentic dominance commences the precise moment you possess the capacity to abandon everything without hesitation. Systems consistently outlive temporary fortunes. Every fortune eventually experiences inevitable decay through time. Economies collapse catastrophically. Currencies devalue dramatically. Empires crumble completely. But systems, sophisticated structures of control, can successfully outlive their original creators by centuries. The contemporary elite comprehend this reality with terrifying clarity and ruthless precision.